tensions between Russia and the West are at an all-time high. 5 days after the US and Western nations expelled Russian diplomats, Moscow has retaliated. In an hour-and-a-half-long press briefing, an animated spokesperson from the Russian Foreign Ministry provided a point-by-point rebuttal to the charges made by Britain in the spy poisoning case. And then came the announcement. Moscow expelled 60 US diplomats, 58 from Moscow and 2 from the American consulate in Yekaterinburg. Moscow also withdrew consent to the opening of the American consulate in St. Petersburg after the results of a poll on Twitter, which had asked participants to decide which office they wanted shuttered. The move is not a first of its kind. Last year, President Putin had ordered the US Embassy in Moscow to reduce its staff by 755 employees after American sanctions against Russia for meddling in the American polls. But the reduction involved only the excess staff like security guards, translators, cooks, and so on. But with a stark reduction in diplomatic attachés, bilateral ties will only be strained further. But Washington is unfazed, firmly backing their ally, the United Kingdom. White House seems to be in no mood to back down, criticizing the Kremlin for its actions.
I want to remind you that there is no justification for the Russian response. Our actions were motivated purely by the attack on the United Kingdom, the attack on a British citizen and his daughter. Remember, this is the first time that a weapons-grade nerve agent, Novichok, has been used outside of war on Allied soil. We have not taken these steps lightly. We've taken these steps in concert with our allies across the world. 28 countries now join the United States backing our allies in the decision to have kicked out 153 Russian spies from the various countries.
America's crackdown comes as a surprise for many, with President Donald Trump being wary of rebuking his Russian counterpart, at least publicly. The American president's Twitter-happy fingers have been restrained. They haven't made any comment on the Skripal poisoning case on the microblogging site. In fact, days after Britain accused Russia of poisoning the former double agent, President Trump picked his phone up to congratulate President Putin on his re-election, something that has come under increased scrutiny.
In terms of a so-called congratulatory call, that is something that we do. That is something that past presidents have done. Even you may not like a country, you may have difficulties with a country, but that doesn't mean that you don't pick up the phone and have a conversation. The reality is, whether we like it or not, we have to have a relationship with a government as large and as significant as Russia.
Though the US claims that the UK's word is enough, analysts believe that Britain hasn't provided enough evidence to prove its point.
I set out clearly.
I think many countries in the world, including in Europe, are hoping for better relations with Russia so that there can be cooperation, not just confrontation, towards solving common problems and working towards economic development and stability. Britain is using its still considerable diplomatic pressure, particularly with its ally, the United States, to try and pressure countries to take actions, regardless of the fact that, as behind the scenes I've got no doubt is being discussed in these European capitals, that the British government has produced very little, if any, evidence to support its claims.
And Russia, too, has accused the UK and the US of arm twisting the other European nations into sanctions against Britain, because even nations like Germany, who otherwise have maintained good ties with Russia, have backed the UK. Berlin expelled 4 diplomats, and now in recent updates we can confirm that Russia, too, has decided to send back 4 German diplomats. Now, Russia has called for a meeting with ambassadors of France and other European nations to send a note of protest, but the diplomats made their support for Britain quite clear.
With the foreign ministry here in Moscow. Sprich ist heute genutzt, zweierlei zu unterstreichen. Zum einen, es bleibt Deutschlands Interesse, ein gutes Verhältnis mit Russland zu haben, ein Interesse, dass die Menschen in Deutschland, die Menschen in Russland sich verstehen. Wir bleiben dazu bereit und offen zum Dialog. Und zum anderen, angesichts der
Meanwhile, Britain's looking to tighten the noose further. The Home Secretary Amber Rudd has asked British officials to review Tier 1 visas, which allow people who have more than £2 million of investment in Britain to stay in the country. From trade to investment to diplomatic ties, a lot is at stake here. And if there's no urgent resolution to the crisis, the world could be staring at another Cold War-like era. WION's correspondent Julia Chapman is joining me from Moscow for more on that story. Julia, good evening. What are you learning about the summoning of these EU ambassadors?
Yes, so as you said, a number of European ambassadors have been summoned to the Foreign Ministry today, and it took a while to find out exactly what they were discussing whilst there. But now we're starting to hear some news that a few of them are having to expel some of their diplomats. We're hearing 2 are going to go from Italy, from the Italian embassy, and 2 from the Dutch embassy, as well as 1 from the Finnish. But I think the biggest escalation that we're seeing today is that also the British ambassador, Laurie Bristow, was summoned to the Foreign Ministry, and it's surprising because Russia has already expelled 23 British diplomats. They've gone already. That happened 2 weeks ago. So we were very curious to see what they were going to say today, and it seems now we're hearing from the Foreign Ministry that there's going to be an escalation between the UK and Russia. They are now giving the UK a month to reduce the size of its diplomatic mission to Russia to make it equal to that of the Russian diplomatic mission to the UK. So now they're now going further than the mirroring of the steps taken by all of those Western countries.
And are these ambassadors being expelled, or the diplomats of a lower rank who are being asked to go?
I think it's more of the lower level diplomats. I mean, it depends on the size of the diplomatic mission of each individual country. Most European Union members, or other European countries as well, have reasonably large diplomatic communities here, and so there will probably be more economic or consular level officials and less likely to be ambassador level.
All right, Julia Chapman, thanks very much for joining us with that update from Moscow. Appreciate it.